Should an honest businessman like yourself make enemies? Then they would become my enemies, and then they'll fear you. I just,
It's like I'm there.
you like,
You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures
Hello,
all
everybody, and welcome to the show. My name is James, joined as ever by my good friend Steve, and this is our 200th video. And so we are doing the impossible, and we are nailing down our top 10 films of all time.
James, this is totally impossible. And for this impossible task, after 200 videos, we have painted the back wall. So the Hackman Studios is now gone from green to taupe, although we still have the Christmas decorations going here. Let's go right into this. Top
Right.
10 films of all time. Really, the first two or three, I think you and I have talked so much over the years about our films. So I'm going to do the ones that I know you already know, and I'm going to start out with number one, Casablanca. I've talked about this film so much in so many previous videos that we've done. I'm almost hesitant to go into it again. But the reality is, I saw this film my first time in the 80s and I fell in love with it. It has been my go-to film. To me, it is one of the six or seven perfect films that I think dialogue, story, casting, directing, just everything about it is perfect. My 50th birthday party was Casablanca themed. I love it. It's my number one film.
Fantastic. So we are ranking these then. We are,
I'm not going
or
to rank them, but other than I think the first two or three are probably ranked, and after that, it could fluctuate and depending on my mood in the moment.
right. Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, considering how many thousands and thousands of films we have seen, the fact that anything is in the
Yeah.
conversation today means it's right up there and there's not much between them.
Hey, and I watched Saving Private Ryan last night, and I hadn't watched it in a while. I nearly made a swap, but I didn't do it.
Oh, wow.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Well, let's go straight in. And number one, a film that is always there, right at the top of my list, is Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now. So
Yes.
this is a movie that I saw as a teenager, and it immediately just kind of sort of blew me away. I was aware of Coppola already, of course, with the Godfather movies, but there was something about this story, about how, I think I'd already seen Platoon and a few Hamburger Hill, maybe, and a few other sort of more traditional Vietnam movies. And this was one of those movies that showed me that you can be more surreal, more avant-garde,
Mhm.
more experimental with what was still perceived to be sort of a mainstream studio
Right.
movie. I think this is the first film where I really got sort of behind the scenes and you got into the story of how it was made, and arguably that is as interesting and makes as great a movie with the documentary Hearts of Darkness as the movie itself. The fact that it can take its origins from something like Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness and turn it into something, sort of repurpose that story into the modern era, if you like.
Mhm.
And then just the performances, the use of music, just the spectacular photography, and yeah, just this kind of dreamlike, nightmarish quality that
Yes.
it has. It never ceases to just completely envelop me, take me into its world, and I could watch it anytime. It's a weird thing to say about like a war movie, but it's just
Mhm.
one of those experiences that I just enjoy having with a movie. It's fantastic. It's always right up there at the very top of my list.
Fantastic. Fantastic. My next one, I'm going to hit you with another Coppola right back at you. It's going to be The Godfather. Goes without saying, just one of the great films of all time, but it's a personal favorite of mine. I've watched this film so many times over the years. It never fails to just elicit pure enjoyment from me. I mean, Brando, James Caan, Al Pacino, Robert Duvall, Talia Shire. I mean, this is just a who's who of some of the best acting in the world with a Mario Puzo script, which is so spot on and engages you to the point where there's these mob people and you know that they're bad people and yet you want to be part of their world. You want to have a godfather like him. There's this little dark side of you when you watch it. And from the very first uh, dialogue when Brando just says to Bonacera, Bonacera, what have I done to you to have you treat me so disrespectfully? It's
That's not bad.
just yeah, Oh, I can do the Brando. I can do the where he says, "And should an honest businessman like yourself make enemies, then they would become my enemies, and then they'll feel you. I just,
It's like I'm there.
you're like you're there. That's another reason why I love this film. It's the one impression I can do.
Cool.
So there we go.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely love those movies. They're so close to my top 10. Godfather,
Mhm.
Godfather 2. Yeah, no questions there. Okay, second one for me. What another of those filmmakers you immediately gravitate to when you're first getting into film at my age was Stanley Kubrick, and then it's
Mhm.
just a case of okay, which Stanley Kubrick are you going to go with? I think the first one I saw was The Shining, which I still rank as probably my favorite horror movie of all time, but as the years have gone on, as I go back to his movies again and again, the one that keeps coming to the surface is 2001: Space Odyssey. I
Oh, yeah.
really do find that to be like that's for me a perfect movie in its
Mhm.
in just its craft. You can argue about the performances, you can argue about sort of the lack of narrative, propulsive
Mhm.
narrative, or whatever. But just in terms of a movie where he clearly knows exactly what he's setting out to achieve, and it feels so beautifully choreographed, whether you're looking at somebody sort of jogging in circles in an anti-gravity room,
Mhm.
or whether you're watching sort of spaceships sort of orbit the Earth, or whether you're watching sort of the Stargate open and us being
Mhm.
transported to beyond Jupiter. I mean, I've read the book. I know it wasn't like based on a book. They were kind of developed sort of in parallel at the same time. So arguably the book is a novelization of the movie and vice versa. Um, and still there's so much ambiguity, so much openness to the end of that movie that I love. Every time I watch it, I walk away with a slightly different opinion of what it really means and how it
Right.
works and what the monoliths mean and their relationship with humanity and the rest of the world. It's that kind of movie. It's the kind of movie that just really cracks your head open
Mhm.
and just stuffs it full of questions and ideas. And it's obviously
Mhm.
beautiful to look at. And it just feels sort of clinically precise in a way so
Right.
few movies do. So it's always right up at the top of my list.
Well, I'm going to disrupt my order that I originally had and jump ahead to Contact, which I have in my top 10, the Robert Zemeckis movie with Jodie Foster and Matthew McConaughey. And the reason I chose Contact, I'm realizing it's representative of a genre of films that I call the films that give Steve a sense of wonder, that help
Mm,
me explore the bigger issues in the universe. And for me, 2001, its sequel 2010, which I think is always underrated, the Peter Hyams film that with Roy Scheider, Helen Mirren, Bob Balaban, John Lithgow. It is such an underrated film because of how good Kubrick's 2001 is, but
mm.
then also Christopher Nolan's Interstellar. This is a genre of films that I just go back to again and again. I couldn't put them all in my top 10, so I chose Contact to be representative of them, just because I just love the complementary nature between science and religion, and that they can kind of wrestle with one another. But in the end, there is a lot more, to quote Shakespeare, there's a lot more in heaven and earth than has been devised in our, I forgot how the exact quote goes, but something, I should
Yeah,
have been
no,
able to
it's right
rattle
on the
that
tip of
right
my
off.
tongue. I know exactly what you mean. The quote you mean, yeah.
It's in Hamlet. And
Yes.
I just love the performances by Jodie Foster, how she's able to be this hard science woman. And at the end, when she has basically experienced the unfathomable, the unknowing, and she has to be before a trial, but like a testimony, a
A
congressional
tribunal or something, isn't it? I think.
tribunal, yeah. And when she, when James Woods is just grilling her, you're a scientist. How do you expect us to believe this? And she goes, I can't, all I can do is give you my experience. And she just kind of breaks down. It's just so powerful for me, and everything leading up to it's wonderful. Anyhow, Contact. And it's one of my top 10, and it's representative of films that I attribute wonder to.
Magnificent. Yeah. It's a film I don't know all that well, I've got to be honest. I've probably only seen it once or twice. And of all those films that you just reeled off, it's definitely the one I know least of
Okay.
those. But I think it's one I definitely need to sort of revisit because yeah, I did. I think I went and watched it last after Interstellar because a lot of people were making those comparisons between the two, and I was like, oh
Mhm.
yeah, I need to see that again. But I probably haven't
Yeah.
seen it now for about a decade, so I should do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Okay,
Carl Sagan, based on the Carl Sagan book, which makes it wonderful. I don't have time to go into all of that, but suffice to
right.
say, watch it again.
Okay, so I'm doing these in like no real order, which also gives
Mhm.
me a little bit of latitude to maybe make real time last minute changes, just because I have a list of 21 films in front of me, and I'm going, oh well. So
You're not doing yourself any favors here, James. You're not
no, I'm
doing
not.
yourself
I
any
promise
favors.
I will only nail down 10, but I think that that's inherently what's so great about these is it should be this continually changing, oscillating kind of
Absolutely.
matrix of choice because it depends also it gets me into the thing I always rant about, which is people who say, oh, I've seen that film, so I don't need to see it again. It's like, of course you do, because
Yeah.
you change, and so your
Yeah.
relationship with that film changes. Anyway, suffice to say that I'm currently, as people regular viewers might notice, not where I normally am. I'm in the UK right now, and on the flight over, there was a documentary on the entertainment system called Aliens Expanded, which I'd heard was in the mix, and it's a sort of new feature length retrospective but making of documentary about James Cameron's Aliens. And so I thought, great, I'll watch that, and it just made me realize Aliens is always there near my top 10, and it just made me realize, you
Yeah.
know what? This is just one of my favorite movies of all time. I rank this above Alien. It's a different
Wow.
kind of movie to Alien, and I think it took what Ridley Scott put together with Alien and blew it up. It was like, yeah, okay, you've got this thing, but what if you never even saw it do that in Alien? So it's like, well, what if there were lots of them and there were soldiers, and I just love the fact that it attempts to be so many things. It's a war movie, uh it's also a survival movie. It's also a movie about parenthood, about grief, the relationship between, I think it's Sigourney Weaver's best performance ever.
Mhm.
Her relationship with Newt, the little girl. I think it's the movie that set the template for every action movie that has a team that came
Right.
after it.
Yeah.
The efficiency of the characterizations, where every character is defined clearly enough that you know exactly who each one is, even if you couldn't tell who,
Mhm.
I couldn't tell you their life story. But then as the group is whittled down, you know these characters. And you see it happen so many times in so many other action movies where they try and emulate that kind of team dynamic with the goofy one and the scared one and the tech guy,
Mhm.
and it's never as well done as here. I also think Aliens has the best exposition of
Mm.
any movie. The way it's ingrained so naturally into the story, to the point where I will argue that you don't need to have seen Alien
Mhm.
to get everything necessary out of Aliens. It's put forward, but with that little tribunal that she has to sit through, and her pulling her hair out, going, "You don't understand. This is what I saw. This is what it can
Yeah.
do." It's done so well, that yeah, you don't need to have seen the film before, and it exists. If Alien didn't exist, it would be absolutely fine, and this would work absolutely great. And it's obviously just hugely, hugely quotable and entertaining, and
Yeah.
just has some of the best effects work ever. It's it's right up there. I just absolutely love, love, love it. It's Aliens.
Mhm. Now I feel almost like I have to defend Alien now because Alien is in my top 10.
Bring
And
it.
that's
Yeah,
the
jump
next
right
one I'm
in.
going to do. And I rewatched it with my son maybe 3, 4 months ago, and I was reminded how timeless this film is. We're talking late 70s technology, and yet
Hmm.
nothing feels dated. Everything just feels like they could have made this yesterday. It is done that well. As much as I love aliens, this is not Space Marines. These are corporate miners who just want to get home. They're bitching about their bonuses. There's a real blue collar feel to this film. It's not camp run amok with teens and the virgin and this is just regular blue collar guys that get stuck on this ship because the corporate bigwigs feel like we're going to basically Amazon or Apple. We're willing to
Yeah.
sacrifice all of you guys just to bring this guy home, this alien home. And once that's all kind of revealed, again, rewatching it, I thought this is again one of those perfect films for me. Alien is just so, like you said, it sent the template for aliens for the next 40 years. And this film is just so consequential. And so it has to be my top 10. And I keep rewatching it I still remember being a kid, everybody was going to see Alien, but because we came from a kind of a religious house, my dad wanted to go see it, but my mom was going to forbid it. So my dad waited until mom went on some Christian religious women's retreat for the weekend, and then he snuck me and my two brothers to the theater. I remember seeing this on the big screen when I was about 13 years old, thinking, this is incredible. And it was one of those films that, in my mind, there's a handful of films that gave me a real love for cinema, and this was one of them.
Fantastic. Yeah, and I want to make it perfectly clear. I love Alien.
And Aliens, same. I'm glad you picked one and I picked the other. There we go.
There you go. That says all you need to know. They make a great double bill. It's like those who prefer Godfather Part 2 over The Godfather. I get it. You're not wrong. Sure. It's just personal preference. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, I'm going to do probably my favorite comedy of all time. Comedy, I find, is always gets a bit of short shrift, and it's always difficult because I don't think many of them have that inherently like rewatchable factor.
Right.
And I think our senses of humor develop and change. Well, hopefully, evolve over time. And
some things are not as acceptable anymore to joke about.
Well, and there's also that. There is also that. But there is a film that I saw when I was a schoolboy, a teenager, and it was one of our favorite movies, me and my friends. And we so much so that we actually put on a stage production of it. And that is Bruce Robinson's Withnail and I. Which is this fantastic British movie from, I think, about 1987. And it's Bruce Robinson's first movie, and it's the film that really introduced Richard E. Grant into the world, and for many remains his signature role. Him and Paul McGann play out of work, struggling actors and roommates in London at the end of the 60s. And so London is in decline. The country is in decline. Withnail, played by Richard E. Grant, is from money, but he has no money. They're both completely broke, and they handle it in very different ways because he is very extravagant and outspoken about the fact that he doesn't deserve this. It's like, don't you know who I am? Don't you know where I've come from? He's never been in this situation before where he truly has to fend for himself, and he is destitute. And so he's completely over the top. Whereas Paul McGann's character, who is not named in the film, his name in the script is Marwood, but he is just sort of and I. He even introduces himself to a complete stranger as, it's me, at one point, which works brilliantly. He's from working class background, so he is sort of more attuned to the daily struggle, to the grind. And so they're these very conflicting characters who've been thrown together and are forced to survive. They're both, dedicated alcoholics, and so there is a Withnail and I drinking game, which I do not advise that you follow because you'll be dead by about half an hour in. And what the film follows them is as they reach their wits' end and they have to get out of the city, and so they go and spend a weekend in the country by borrowing the cottage of Withnail's very gay Uncle Monty. And so off they go to the Lake District, and they spend a so spectacularly terrible time in the countryside, and it's just absolutely wonderful. Again, it's so well written. The dialogue is almost Shakespearean in just how over the top it is, how hilarious it is, how vulgar it is, because they're actors as well. That kind of plays into the way they speak to each other, the way they interact with other people. And I just find it so beautiful, and it's so melancholy. There is this inherent sense of tragedy and sadness sort of throughout it, because you know that this is not only sort of the end of an era for the country, but an end of an era for them, certainly as a couple. Right. If not just as people as well. And so it's just a beautiful movie that keeps on giving. Some days you'll find it hilarious, some days you'll find it sort of heartbreakingly depressing, but it keeps on giving. It's absolutely wonderful. So I cannot live without Withnail and I.
And I am embarrassed to say I still have not seen it. This is the only film that has been mentioned thus far that I have not seen.
Yeah, we keep talking about doing an episode on it, and I would absolutely love that to happen. So we'll work on that.
We will do it. We'll do it. 2025.
New Year's resolution. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. I'll stick in the UK and I'll do. I think it's 1982. I could be off by the year or two, but John Borman's Excalibur, which I just is one of it's just such an incredible film. It's epic. It is grand. Borman spares no expense in creating this world, the Camelot world, with everything Lancelot and Arthur and Guinevere, and there's so many quotable lines in this film. We get to see a very young Helen Mirren playing the evil Morgana. I'd say this about a number of the films on my list. I've watched this film so many times, and it has a sentimental favorite for me too, because this is one I used to watch with my dad a lot. My dad loved this film too. And so it always hits a sweet spot for me. There's, Lancelot's line, "You, sir, would fight to the death against a man who is not your enemy. Over a stretch of land you could easily ride around," and just Merlin telling Arthur, "There's always someone better than yourself." I've used
Mm.
that in my life. Like every time no matter how good you think you are, Steve, at something, there's always someone better than yourself, as Merlin says. So, yeah, John Borman's Excalibur. If you haven't seen it, I know you have, but out there, if you haven't seen it, it is definitely one to see in 2025.
Yeah, it's funny that one. It's a wonderful movie. It's so beautiful and bizarre. As growing up as a young boy in England, you're very much thrown into the Arthurian legends from a very sort of early
Yeah.
age. That's one of those sort of bodies of work that you're immersed in. And I remember being shown Excalibur by my mum when I was very young, but also around the same time watching Monty Python and the Holy Grail. And for
Mhm.
many years, those two films were kind of sort of so entwined and twisted in my head that I couldn't quite remember which bits were in which movie. Because there's a very sort of baroque kind of aesthetic to both of them that
Yeah.
that overlaps sort of far too much. And Holy Grail is my favorite Monty Python movie. It's one of my favorite comedies. It's on my long list. It's not going to make my top 10 today.
Right.
But it's absolutely fabulous. But those two movies cannot be parted in my head. They're just two very expressionistic, bold, surreal takes on the Arthurian legend. I think
Yes.
they're both
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah, and in Excalibur, you get to see one of the early performances by Liam Neeson and Patrick Stewart.
That's true.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and Patrick Stewart has hair in it, I think, if I remember rightly.
Barely. And
Kind of a little bit,
what's
a little bit.
weird is he doesn't look much different than he looks today. The guy has just always been old, but it's okay because he's never really aged either. So it's kind of worked out for him.
Yeah, what was I watching? Just the other day, I was watching The Keep, the Michael Mann film about Nazis
Oh
who
yes.
find a gate to
Yeah,
hell.
with
And
Scott Glenn.
Scott Glenn as a kind of angel character,
Yes.
weird sort of character, and Ian McKellen is in that. And
Yes.
and I was thinking, oh, he must be quite. It's funny because I was watching it with my wife, and when you first see him, she's like, "Oh my God, was that guy never young?" Basically,
Yeah.
and then it's actually revealed that he's playing up much older than his character is because he's very sick,
Right.
and then he's rejuvenated by the powers of the keep later on, and you see that, oh, okay, he's actually only about sort of 40 or something like that. But
That's a very surreal film with a wild soundtrack.
oh yeah, the Tangerine Dream score is pretty cool. Um, but yeah, no, it's just funny that you see all of these actors who are so famous for being when they got much older, and then you realize that they've actually been around forever, and some of them have always looked like
Yeah.
that. Okay, well, I'm going to stay in the UK right now. Now, this is a film that has actually only come into my top 10 quite recently, but it is now here to stay, I believe. And this is the film that we have spoken about. It's a film that I first saw at university and then have gone back to again and again over the years since, and it just grows more and more in my estimations, and that is Powell and Pressburger's The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp.
Oh,
Uh,
yes.
that was a movie that was just it was just one of their movies at first, and I always preferred The Red Shoes or Black Narcissus or something like that, but just the more and more I watch it, I was like, no, this is the movie that really speaks to me. I love movies about sort of the British Empire and the fall of the British Empire, and
Yeah.
Britain wrestling with its with its
Legacy.
status. Yeah, its legacy, its war crimes, its status in the world, really. And this is a movie that is absolutely brilliant about it. It's, on the one hand, it's this fantastic, epic chronicle of sort of 40 years of British history, essentially chronicling the collapse of the empire, and how one man changed from being sort of the hot-headed young maverick to being sort of the stuffy, stuck in their
Yes.
ways aristocracy, and how changing perceptions of warfare and changing perceptions of international foreign policy and just the perspective of older people and older people have on younger people, so it's about growing old, and it's about all of these other things. It's just so good. And at the center of it, you've got this relationship, this friendship between an English soldier and a German soldier, and how they were determined to maintain their friendship despite what was happening around them with the First World War and the Second World War and everything. And it's so beautiful, and it's so much fun. It's so funny. It looks absolutely fantastic. The performances, Roger Livesey, Anton Walbrook, Deborah Carr, who plays like the woman in between them in 3 different incarnations.
Yes.
We've talked about it at great length. We have a video for it somewhere around here.
Yes.
Go check it out, because I just love it, and I love it more and more and more every time I see it. And I'm just like, yes, this is one of my favorite films.
Well, fantastic. Let's switch over to Middle Earth, Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, and I have to specify The Fellowship of the Ring, which
Yes.
I think is one of the perfect movies again. Two Towers was good. Return of the King was good, and then there was diminishing returns after The Fellowship of the Ring, but those 2 other films were great. And then Jackson just kind of went off the rails, and The Hobbit was just, I thought, garbage. But every time I see The Fellowship of the Ring, I saw Middle Earth come to life in the way that I think Tolkien would have been proud. I saw that film no less than 9 times at the cinema when it came
Wow.
out.
Does that include both versions of it? Because they re-released it, didn't they, like a year later?
That was
or
for the
so?
initial release. I went like 9 or 10 times,
Wow.
and every time, not unlike The Matrix a couple years earlier, where anytime a friend of mine had not seen it, I had to personally take them to see it, to be with them, to have that experience with them. And for me, The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, just again, perfect film. Watching Middle Earth come to life, watching Legolas, watching Frodo, watching Sam, in the way that I think Tolkien would have come pretty close to imagining himself. It was magical. And so, yeah, that film is in my top 10 and it has been there. There's a few of these films that have kind of slipped and come on and off. This is one of the ones that, since I saw it on the cinema 20 some years ago, has remained in my top 10.
Excellent. Yeah, I don't think there's anything that recent in my top 10, unfortunately.
Mhm.
There are films I love, but I feel that they need time to mature somewhat.
Exactly. But
And
granted, Fellowship of the Ring has been out now for over 20, and it's coming up on
we sound
25 years.
we sound incredibly old. Going, yeah, that's a new movie. I don't want to put that in my
Yeah.
top 10. Totally agree with you. The Fellowship of the Ring is the best of the 3, without any shadow of a doubt. I was never that much of a Tolkien fan. I was more familiar with The Hobbit than with The Lord of the Rings, I think just because they're long and I wasn't much of a reader as a young kid. But yeah, I mean, it's an epic spectacle. It is absolutely fantastic. And I saw it when it came out, and then I did go back and see the extended edition when that came out. And I did that for all 3 of them. And I do own it, both versions on Blu-ray and whatever. But yeah, I'm not
It's
as
one
much
of the
a
few.
Tolkien.
I still have the hard copies of the extended version, the original ones I bought 20 some years ago.
Good. Hang on to those. Physical media is not dead. It's all we've got.
Yeah.
Okay, so staying in the realm of sweeping, epic action adventures, it's time to turn east and go to Akira Kurosawa and the Seven Samurai. Because I mean, Akira Kurosawa is right up there as maybe my favorite filmmaker. There's a couple vying for contention, and every now and again I try, because Seven Samurai is kind of like the obvious Kurosawa choice, and I get that, but there's good reason for that, and occasionally I might say, well, yes, but maybe Rashomon is better, or maybe High and Low is better, or maybe Yojimbo. It's like, it's not. No, Seven Samurai is the best thing he's ever done, and it's one of the greatest movies of all time, if not a worthy candidate for the greatest movie of all time. We have talked about it together.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I was thinking of you just the other day. I think it was Boxing Day afternoon. The Magnificent Seven came on the TV,
Yeah.
and I was like, "Oh, if Steve was here, he'd be watching
Mm.
this." And I know what a fan you are of that film, but Seven Samurai is just so good. The characterization is so good. The sense of scale, the sense of stakes, the life
Oh,
and death stakes between just ordinary people in it, and just finding heroism, finding a true calling in the smallest of places, in the
yes.
most inconsequential of actions, and just it's just so powerful, and it really manages to make the epic intimate. It also has just incredible action sequences. It has so many just
Mm.
iconic story beats that you watch and you're like, oh, that's where that came from. Oh, that's where
Yeah.
that came from. It's been the template for so many movies, and it remains for a movie that's over 3 hours long, and is over what 70? Didn't it just have its 70th anniversary? I think that this past year. It's still so watchable, so entertaining. And I've actually just recently got hold of the new 4K of it, which I haven't had time to sit down and watch yet, and I cannot wait to find the time to sit down and watch it because everyone says it just it never looked better. So yeah, it's there
Well,
and always will be.
that's what I want to see on the big screen. I've only seen it on my TV,
Hmm.
and that's a film that I really want. When we get a Kurosawa retrospective come through Hong Kong, we have to go see that on the big screen.
I would be absolutely delighted, and it's going to happen soon. Hong Kong's pretty good about Kurosawa. Whenever there's an opportunity to play some, they will.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, not only just seeing it big and seeing it loud, but just dedicating the time and your
Hmm.
attention, without
Yeah.
any distraction, and just being like, no, 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 I'm going to be completely immersed in this, and it's going to be wonderful, and it always
Mhm.
is.
I'm going to do another fairly recent film within the last 30 years. A Few Good Men, Rob Reiners,
Ah, yes.
with Jack Nicholson, Tom Cruise, Demi Moore. I just love this movie so much. You've heard me sing its praises for years. For me, courtroom dramas in general are wonderful. This is the this is the best one ever made. It's got the Aaron Sorkin snappy dialogue. There's just so much in this that's happening all the time. The back and forth quips as Jack Nicholson and Tom Cruise, even between Demi Moore and Tom Cruise, when she's trying to get him thrown off the case because she thinks he doesn't care enough about it and he's just playing softball. And he goes, well, if you think you can do it, and then she comes back and he goes, well, were you able to, get me thrown off the case? And she just says, is there anybody in this town you don't drink or play softball with? Just lines like that. Is there anybody in this town you don't drink or play softball with? Um, and so, yeah, I will sit down and watch that movie at least once a year, and every single time it moves me. There's such a moral goodness in it. There's Sorkin. Sorkin writes in a way that I want to live in his world. Whether it's The West Wing, whether it's The Newsroom, A Few Good Men, there is a moral compass in Aaron Sorkin, and he can't help but have it shine through. And so at
Mm.
the very end, it's hard not to just stand up and go, "Hooray for good has won, evil and corruption has been conquered. I feel good now." And so he's able to do that, and with the performances by Cruise and Nicholson and more, it brings it home. Love this film.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, it's one of the most sort of watchable and endlessly entertaining sort of movies, certainly courtroom dramas ever.
Yeah.
I remember it still sticks in my memory when I went to see it with a few friends back when it first came out, and so we were probably about 14, something like that. And it's the only film I remember, certainly around that time, in a sort of non-festival premiere setting or anything like that, where the very English, very sort of suburban audience applauded at the end. That just
Oh,
does not happen in
yeah.
in like the Odeon in Brighton. That just does
No,
not
no.
happen.
Yeah, yeah.
And it did, and it was just a sort of an afternoon screening on a Saturday. And it was just like, huh? And I remember being sort of so surprised, but then being like, you know what? I kind of feel like clapping too.
Yeah.
It's just that kind of movie, and
Yeah.
it just, and the cast is incredible. It's so deep, so many characters, so many wonderful performances. People like sort of Kevin Bacon and Kiefer Sutherland, and
Yeah, yeah.
actors like that who just pop up for a couple of scenes, and they're just amazing. Yeah, it's brilliant. It's a really really great movie. My next one. Okay, I've got to talk about Martin Scorsese. He was probably the first filmmaker that I really kind of latched onto. I was just the right age. It was as simple as
Mhm.
that. I always oscillate between, okay, which is my favorite movie. For many years, Taxi Driver was my favorite, but it just feels a little bit too sort of angry young man to me now,
Right.
a bit
Yeah.
incel. I mean, and I know that a lot of people have lambasted anyone who likes the film these days for that reason, and I think that is unfair. But I think that there is an element of that to it, which makes Travis Bickle like incredibly unlikable. And nothing wrong with a provocative anti-hero, but
Mhm.
and it also feels like sort of Scorsese's French New Wave movie. He was the
No.
style in which it's made, and increasingly I'm like, no, no, no. The better film is Goodfellas. For me, that's his best movie. That's when everything just fell into place. It's all of those stories he's been wanting to tell about sort of. Not the same mafia as The Godfather is. This is
Right.
just, more sort of blue collar gangsters who are, second generation or whatever Italian Americans, uh, who have never quite hit the big time. They're never quite leading the glamorous lifestyle that they think they're
Right.
living, But it's so he manages to find sort of big personalities in this world, a lot of humor in this world. He manages to tell the story incredibly vibrantly, incredibly entertainingly. There's so much energy just in his filmmaking style, in his camera work, in his editing, that it finds the whole you realize before you know it that you're being completely seduced by this lifestyle that's not great in any shape or form, and it's not even from a moral standpoint necessarily. It's not like crime is bad, it doesn't pay. It's just like they're not having that good a time, they're not
Right.
living that good a lifestyle. They're all at each other's throats the whole time. They're all struggling to make ends meet still. They're all wasting their money on the most gaudy, garish rubbish that doesn't last. And it's just the story of a guy who was seduced by it and then realized, oh no, I need to get out, and
Yeah. Yeah.
and was a coward and turned tail and, and turned into a rat. And I love the honesty of all of that, in a
Yeah.
film that is so hip and so powerfully seductive and so seemingly just on the surface, it seems like what he's doing is completely trying to sell this as an aspirational lifestyle. You're like, no, no, he's really not. If you actually
Yeah.
look at what's going on, it's just bleh. It's completely
Yeah.
gaudy and cheap and terrible. And I love him for it. I think it's where he really fired on all cylinders. It's where everything really
Yeah.
fell into place, and it's pretty perfect and eminently rewatchable. Goodfellas, yeah.
Excellent. That was your Scorsese representation. I have to have
Yes.
a Spielberg representation. And God, there's so many good. Spielberg has entertained me since I was 9 years old, and I am 58. And so
Do you remember
it's
the
it's
first
hard.
you saw?
Um, Other than Jaws, which is the movie I'm going to say
Okay.
right now, is it Duel? Duel was a TV movie of the week that I actually saw before Jaws. It used to come
Oh,
on like
great.
Tuesday nights as a kid growing up. They would do these movies of the week, and Spielberg was this young unknown. I didn't know it was Spielberg at the time. I just remember watching this fascinating movie as a young boy where a guy was being chased by an 18-wheel semi because he had kind of cut him off a little bit. And how do you never see the guy's face in the 18-wheeler, but have you ever seen Duel?
Oh yeah.
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 And
It's
just
it's
Dennis
the
Weaver.
truck. It's not the driver,
Yeah,
it's the truck. Yeah.
yeah, it's the truck itself. You never see the driver. And even as a young boy, that film like blew me away because we'd watch this every Tuesday night, every the Tuesday, and that was the one that I remember. There's
So
four or five of those.
do you think it's
Yeah,
possible you saw it on its debut when it was first came out, or would that have been a
incredibly
little
likely, incredibly
okay,
likely. I think it premiered on a movie of the week.
like 73,
I'm
74, something like that?
Yeah, I'm almost certain of that. So I would have been about 8, 9 years old. My mom and dad would often on Tuesday nights go bowling, and we had our babysitter, and we would watch the movie of the week. And there was a few like George Hamilton's The Dead Don't Die and Don't Be Afraid of the Dark and the Trilogy of Terror. Like they would do these kind of weird TV movie things, and Duel was one of them. And
Wow.
yeah. So, but I digress. Jaws
Sorry.
is the one I want to highlight. Again, just the perfect film. I remember seeing this at the cinema when I was about 10 years old when it came out, 75, I think. We had just moved from Detroit proper into the suburbs, got to meet a few of my local suburban friends, talked our parents into letting us go see Jaws, and scared the bejeebies out of me. I'll never forget having popcorn when Roy Scheider says, how would you like to shovel this shit? And suddenly, for the first time, you really see the shark come up out of the water, and I just threw popcorn all over. And again, that film has been with me for so many years. It never, we rewatched it again maybe 3, 4 months ago, and I'm just constantly fascinated. Robert Shaw, when they're sitting around the Orca, Richard Dreyfuss, comparing cuts, and Robert Shaw talking about, back in, when we used to do
The
this. And
Indianapolis,
it's
the
just,
USS Indianapolis,
yes,
wasn't it?
yeah,
Yeah.
and we pull those guys out, and the sharks got them. Um, just a
Sometimes the
wonderful
sharks would go
film.
away. Sometimes they wouldn't
Yeah,
go
that's the
away.
wooden way. Yeah. And yeah, anyhow, just a beautiful, again, I think it's the perfect film. It is one of the perfect films where it's hard to find a flaw in it.
Yeah.
So
Well,
there we go.
it's on my list too. So
Oh, good.
I will
There we
just
go.
continue echoing everything you've said. Yeah, it's almost certainly the first. I grew up just in that sweet spot of when Spielberg was hitting his stride. So I mean, Close Encounters came out the year I was born. So that to do like sort of Close Encounters and then Raiders and then E.T.
Hmm.
and all of those sort of in quick succession with Jaws already in the back in the rearview mirror. It's like wow. And so I
Yeah.
don't remember the first time I saw Jaws, but it was just a movie that I had always seen.
Hmm.
And I don't think it was until I went to university where that and Blade Runner, which is another film that's so close to being in my top 10, but just
Yeah,
just
yeah. It's
just
one
got
of
pushed.
those.
Those are two films that came up again and again and again in our film classes, just as great examples to illustrate various points
Mhm.
of filmmaking and editing and mise en scène or whatever it happened to be. And that's when I really started to appreciate just how perfectly constructed Jaws is.
Yeah.
It's a brilliant story. You spot how sort of it's a movie of two halves. There's on the
Yes.
island and
Yeah.
then on the boat, and that there's that one shot that transitions from one to the other where you see the boat leave the jetty pier, but you see it framed through the jaws of a
Yeah.
shark hanging in the window, and you're
Yeah.
like, oh wow,
Yeah.
now you're in the belly of the beast kind of thing. Moments like that, it's so economical
Yeah.
in its storytelling. There is no wasted
It's
space there.
no, no, it
There's no
is
fat on that.
minimalist. It is
Really.
very minimalist.
And you hear all the stories about how yes, because there was going to be a lot more of the shark, but then the shark wasn't working properly, and so and all of these sort of accidental
Hmm.
last minute
Yeah.
on set choices that had to be made, and it was a complete disaster sort of waiting to happen, and everybody thought it was a complete write-off, and this 25-year-old filmmaker was never going to work again, and all this kind of stuff. But that's where some of the best movies come from. I mean, that's why I love Apocalypse
Yeah.
Now so much, for many of the same reasons. That it was so they sort of went to hell and back in order to make it, and just emerged with
Yeah.
just something so brilliantly constructed. I mean, the characters are so good, the dialogue is so good.
Yeah.
I love it. I really, really do.
See, I know about the name of the mechanical shark was Bruce, and I knew they were having troubles with Bruce, and the urban legends are exactly what you said. But I've always wondered since Duel came out before, and Spielberg knew the power of the unseen enemy,
Hmm.
that what is unseen is always far more terrifying than what's seen, because our imagination is always more weird and twisted than what the reality is. And so I'm always wondering how much of that is just kind of propelled an urban legend to kind of keep
Oh, I'm
the you
sure a
know,
substantial
yeah,
amount of it. I'm sure. I
yeah,
mean, it's or put it this way, it's certainly something that he has doubled down on since. I mean, you look at Jurassic Park, you look at even something like E.T. Actually, those
mhm,
opening sequences in E.T. When the alien
yeah,
first arrives and is hiding in the shed at the back, it's all about what you can't see.
yeah,
And he
yeah,
manages to build sort of real fear, real tension just in the unknown and in the
yeah.
shadows and all that kind of stuff. So he
We
has
just
certainly,
rewatched. I'm sorry, I was just going to say we just rewatched Jurassic Park at the outdoor cinema here at the
I
AIA,
love it. It's
and
great.
it just as soon as you hear they're in the Jeeps and you hear the boom and you see the glass with the water just
Mm.
and it's still terrifying. I know it's coming and it is still terrifying. The
And
use of
that's,
sound, the use
yeah,
of that unseen enemy, it's perfect.
it's a perfect example. Like the yellow barrels in
Yeah,
Jaws. It's
yes.
like it's showing the T-Rex without showing the T-Rex.
Hmm.
When you see the footprint and then you see the water rippling in the footprint, and
Yeah.
you're like, oh my goodness, this is coming. And
Yeah.
I remember being sort of like blown backwards in my seat during that sequence in Jurassic Park, that first T-Rex attack. And I'd read the book, I knew what was coming,
Yeah.
but just like, wow, the sheer sense of spectacle. So, yeah, I mean, of course, Steven Spielberg is one of the absolute greats. And definitely, if you grew up during the 80s, he was on such a run. All the
Yeah.
India, we were
Yeah.
just watching a bit of Temple of Doom. It's Christmas in the UK. All these great movies have been on TV this week. So we're just sitting there like
Yeah.
after lunch watching whatever's on. It's Temple of Doom, it's Agatha Christie, it's
Yeah.
all of these fantastic movies. And you're just like, yeah, that guy is good. He knows what he's doing, that
He's
Spielberg kid. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So
He's
yeah,
gonna go places.
he is. So yeah, I mean, Jaws is up there for me as well. It's that or Raiders of the Lost Ark, but I think Jaws is just
Yeah.
so spot on. So yeah, so it's back to
Yeah.
you.
I think one of the attributes that is needed for any film to make my top 10, and probably yours as well, is immense rewatchability. To be able to watch it again at any time and not feel like, oh, I got to watch this again, or I know this too well. And so, one of the films that I think has entered my top 10 recently, and yet probably should have been there for far longer, is The Shawshank Redemption.
Okay,
And
yeah.
that, again, this film it has a slow burn. When I first saw it, I liked it. I've always liked it. But it's interesting as I've rewatched it over the years. I've seen more metaphor. I've seen actually, me coming from a religious background, how churches have used it in Bible studies to give a presentation of Christ in and it's, I won't, maybe another time we'll do a full exposition
Sure.
on the Shawshank Redemption. But there's just there's a lot of imagery and metaphor that has a lot of Christology in it. And it's not only for that reason alone. I mean, just incredible performances by Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman. But again, not unlike A Few Good Men, there's something about injustice has been done, and there is systemic injustice. And how, if people can just rise above their self-interest and do something to impact the environment around them, they can actually break those chains of systemic injustice. And I know that's a grandiose exposition there, but that's what really resonates for me is that Tim Robbins, he is very much a Christ character. He goes into this prison and everybody around him is corrupt. And yet he, despite all the injustices that are inflicted on him, he maintains this positive atmosphere to everyone around him. And slowly, people start being transformed. He invades the environment like the Allies invading Normandy. He gets a beachhead, and then the environment around him transforms. And watching that over the course of the film is just beautiful to watch. And so this film is now in my top 10.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, I mean it's a banger. It's such a great
Yeah.
movie. Um, and I do I went to see that when it first came out because I remember it was a complete flop when it first came out.
It was,
Nobody
yeah.
nobody went to see it. And I remember going to see it and going, that was great. Why is nobody talking about this movie? And
Yeah.
but yes, people came round. And I think it always has been like number one on IMDb, hasn't it? I think it's one of
Yeah.
those movies
Yeah.
that just appeals to so many demographics.
Yeah.
It's just one of
Yeah.
those sort of overwhelmingly enjoyable, sort of movies that is tough at times, but at the end of the day has such a strong positive message that it just really
Mhm.
resonates with everybody.
And like A Few Good Men, the courtroom drama, the prison film genre. Obviously, there's tons of prison movies, but Shawshank Redemption really kind of rises above them, and it's kind of in its own category, in my opinion.
Absolutely, I agree. Now we're starting to get to the point of the list where I've got like two
Yeah.
spots and I got 10 films, but the movie that I always throw in very early on, rank very highly, and then inevitably it gets kind of nudged down by my sort of top five, if you like. But I do want to spare a moment for here is Roman Polanski's Chinatown, because I think that that is just one of the best sort of film noirs.
Mhm.
I'm aware of the fact that I haven't got any sort of classic sort of Warner Brothers film noirs from the 40s in my list,
Yeah.
and I do love those kind of movies. But I think what Chinatown managed to do is sort of recapture that and then use that kind of 70s new Hollywood, sort of more cynical worldview. If
Mhm.
you look at my list and there's so much of it is from that period of time, that was really my sort of formative years of moviedom. Was when I started sort of taking it more seriously. Sort of in the early
Yeah.
90s, it was like where all the best movies were made between sort of the mid 60s and 1980. It was like just watch all of those, and so still so many of my favorite movies come from that period. And China, I mean, Jack Nicholson obviously is just phenomenal. And during the
Mhm.
70s, he was just at his prime. I mean, he had
Yeah.
this great run of like Five Easy Pieces and then Chinatown and then One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And then in there
Easy
also
Rider.
Easy Rider. Yeah, he had just come onto the scene before that with Easy Rider. The Last Detail is in there as well around that time. These great movies. And then we've already name checked The Shining, which I think which he was so heavily criticized for at the time, but then has become one of his signature roles now. But here he's just so good because he's playing like a real character rather than himself.
Hmm.
And it's one of those brilliantly sort of detailed detective stories where it doesn't, the exposition is almost non-existent in that movie. Uh, you have to be really kind of paying attention, and the pieces are there, and it slowly builds, and it's all about sort of corruption and the water for the city,
Hmm.
and the droughts and drying out areas, selling them off cheap, putting them in the names of dead people, and then you've got that great sort of family tragedy at the center of it with Faye Dunaway. And Faye Dunaway's never looked better, or never performed better. I think she's absolutely fabulous in that film, and just there's something that Polanski does about or throughout the movie about sort of perspective, because it's all about, because he's definitely perceived as or presented as someone from the outside,
Right.
looking into a community that he's lived in but doesn't fully see what's going on. And so many shots are use mirrors and lenses and glasses and things like that you just see these motifs repeated over and over and over and over again through the movie. You're like, there is a real sense of what you can see and what you can't see and what is being hidden in plain sight from you and all this kind of stuff, which I think works incredibly well. So I like to use Chinatown to represent. So it's like the culmination of all of those great sort of Sam Spade and Philip Marlowe
Hmm.
kind of
Right.
stories of the 40s. Bogey would be proud, I think, of
Bogey
what
would
they
be
what
proud.
what they're
Yeah.
doing in
Yeah.
Chinatown. I love that movie, and I keep meaning to. It's out on 4K, and I keep meaning to pick it up, and I have because I haven't seen it in a while. But
Yeah.
it's just so good, and that ending. I love nothing better than a complete bummer of an ending.
Yeah, it's horrible. I mean, it's just
I love
you
downer
know we're
endings.
talking about those films where you get up with and you cheer and you clap. This is definitely not one of
This
them.
is not
This
one
is
of those where everyone's up out
you
there
just
thinking, "Whoa,
you,
yay,
you just you,
incest!" Yeah.
yeah, you walk out of the cinema stunned, like, ah,
I love
okay.
it. I absolutely love it. It's just one of the great, just kick in the nuts endings. And I was like, yes, thank you.
Like you, this 10th spot has been going back and forth. I'm gonna settle on though Mad Max Fury Road
Oh wow,
because
very recent.
I've yes, very recent film. I think what swayed me was recently reading Blood, Sweat, and Chrome, the making of that film, and what George Miller did. I mean, it literally was blood, sweat, and chrome that got that film made. It had been in development for 20 years. It wasn't going to be made. It wasn't. Mel Gibson was getting too old. Everybody was saying you can't do it because not only is Gibson getting too old, but he's running into all those problems that he ran into. You can't have him as Max Rokitansky. They bring in Tom Hardy. And, I'm not an action film guy. Give me a few good men. Give me a whole movie where people are just talking and I'm happy.
Right.
And for Mad Max, there's almost no talking in this film. There's so little dialogue in this. There's no way that this film should be in my top 10. And yet, I find it is able to communicate so much in its action. I feel like dialogue is occurring through the actions, the facial expressions, the the nonverbal cues back and forth are so powerful, and the storytelling is so wonderfully done. Um, and the fact that no one died making this movie
Yeah.
is
It's a miracle.
incredible. I mean, there's very little CGI. It is people doing crazy stunts, and it's not even just for just the spectacle. Charlize Theron, Tom Hardy, Nicholas Hoult just
Hmm.
do a wonderful, wonderful job in this movie. It may wander off my top 10 again, but for this little window of time, it is in my top 10 and will always be in my top favorites.
Fabulous. Yeah, I mean, it's great. I remember it was my favorite film of that year, 2015.
Mhm.
I think it appeals to all of the things that I appreciate most. I'm just looking back on my list now, and I
Mhm.
think that what I tend to reward more than anything is the craft of filmmaking, and the
Yeah,
epic
yeah,
scope and the the sense of spectacle and the style and the immersiveness of it over necessarily performances or even the
mhm,
story. For
mhm,
some people, it's like story first. It's like if
yeah,
it doesn't have a good story, I'm out.
mhm.
And I'm like, but I mean, but 2001: Space Odyssey would be screwed.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
think I think Mad Max Fury Road would be too. The story is just
yeah,
like go there and come back, and it's
yeah,
like okay, but it sort of draws you in through just this sheer kinetic energy of filmmaking, and I think that
yeah,
that is something that I
yeah.
can definitely get behind.
Well, I think one of the things that resonates, coming from my Christian background, one of the things I really appreciated about this film is the storyline where Charlize Theron has this mythical place. If I can just get to this green place, like the world is shit, but and it's hurtful and it's horrible and it treats people bad. But there's this mythical green place, and if we could just get there, and it's like Christians with heaven. If we could, this
Mm,
place is crap, and we just have to get to this heaven place. And then when she has this moment of deconstruction, when she finds out it doesn't exist, she just completely collapses. Like her faith is destroyed. And when Tom Hardy is basically talks her into, the world's not all bad. There's actually good things. And people need our help. And there's actually plenty of food, and there's plenty of water, and there's a paradise back there, but it's held by bad people. And we got to go get it, that we can actually create paradise on earth. And watching her change in her head from this illusion she'd kept for years to something that was practical and would help people who are being oppressed
mm.
really resonated with me. And so that's my little addendum to why this film meant so much to me.
No, that's fantastic. That's fascinating. That is. But okay, so I got to my last pick, and I got so many different things going on
And
in my
what's
head
gonna
right
what's gonna
now.
be what's gonna make the list
Yeah,
here?
you,
You got
you
an
know, part of
honorable mention there?
I'm trying to sort of cheat and honorably mention as many things as possible. But so I'm always torn between should my list be sort of representative. You know,
Hmm.
to what degree should I think, well, I need something from there and there, and I need to represent something from there and there. Do I need more Asian movies in there? Do I need like a
Yeah,
Hong Kong movie like Hard Boiled? Do I need a Korean movie
yeah,
like Memories of Murder or Save the Green Planet or Old Boy? Or do I need another Japanese movie I love, something crazy like
yeah.
Battle Royale or something like that? Or what? I mean, I love not to sort of hit on a pattern after a Roman Polanski movie, but I love those old Woody Allen movies, and I think Annie Hall is one of the
Well,
greatest romantic comedies of all
oh,
time. I think it's absolutely
well,
brilliant.
yeah.
But I'm not going to go there. I'm going to be completely honest and look at a body of work that I could not live without,
Ooh.
and that is the James Bond movies.
Oh, of course. Of course.
And
Yes.
so I'm putting in my number 10 spot my favorite James Bond movie of all time, which is The Spy Who Loved Me,
Okay. Yeah.
which is it's Roger Moore at his best. I think it encapsulates in that movie everything that I love and that I was seduced by with the
Yeah.
Bond movies growing up. It's flying around the world. You go from where it starts off in the Austrian Alps, and then it goes to Egypt, and then it goes to Sardinia, and then you end up at the bottom of the ocean. You've got the gadgets, you've got the car that changes into a submarine, you've got the beautiful women, Barbara Bach, is one of the greats, and
The,
and
the
my
the Sheena
favorite.
Easton song, it's
It's
just
Carly Simon. Thank you very
you're
much.
right. Sorry. Which one
And
does
it was
Sheena Easton do? Shoot. Sorry, I
uh
screwed that one up.
no, it's fine. Did Sheena Easton do All
Yeah.
Time High in Octopussy? Was that her? I can't remember.
No, 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 no. I'm going to look it up in a minute, but you're right.
But
Sorry, Carly
it
Simon.
was Carly Simon. Nobody does it better, and it was
No
the
one
first
does.
dance at my wedding. So, but I absolutely love that movie, and Roger Moore is my favorite James Bond. I know that people will be like, "What? Sean Connery, Daniel Craig, literally anybody else?" I'm like, no. For me, that was when I got into Bond movies. It was in the midst of his tenure. Spy Love Me, coincidentally, came out the year I was born. And it's got the great villains. He's ridiculously camp millionaire who lives at the bottom of the sea and wants everybody to live at the bottom of the sea, and he's willing to steal nuclear weapons in order to do it. You've got
Oh,
Jaws,
yeah. Oh,
there,
yeah.
with
Yeah.
his metal teeth. You've got all everything. Everything is sort of in its right place with this movie. It's sort of, by many stretches, it's kind of the template that the Bond movies got accused of becoming too reliant on, and they're just
Yeah.
regurgitating sort of crime of the week plots. But it's probably the best one of those, in my opinion.
Yeah.
We just watched. There's a new documentary that was on again on TV this week called From Roger Moore with Love, which is sort of a sort of a dramatization of his memoir,
Oh,
looking back through lots of old footage. He was apparently very keen on shooting home videos. It's lots of real home video footage, and it's narrated by Roger Moore as played by Steve Coogan, who does a great
oh, okay. Yeah.
Roger Moore impression, and so he's doing the voiceover, and it was just great, and it just brought it all flooding back. I had the privilege of meeting Roger Moore once when he was in Hong Kong, and I could not live without those movies. Those movies have been so important to me. They continue to be so important to me. They are such a strong. They're really the backbone of why I love movies.
Yeah.
And so to ignore them on the basis of what sort of artistic merit,
No,
how
no.
dare you? It's my
No,
list,
it's
and I'm going to put in whatever I want. And the movies, yeah, I can't name
they're
10 movies I
your
love.
favorites, and
They
that's
are my
why
favorites,
That's your
and that's my favorite Bond movie. So there it is.
That's fantastic, James, because James Bond has been, I'm not quite as big a fan as you are, but it has been with me since I was a child. The arguments used to always be Sean Connery or Roger Moore, and then it expanded out from there. I'm personally a George Lazenby fan. My favorite of all time is On Her Majesty's Secret Service. I love that film.
It's one
But
of the best. It's one of the best movies, and it's a legitimate Christmas movie as well.
That's true. That's true. It is. Well, that's what James and I have for our 200th video, our top 10. But what are your top 10? We would love to hear, hey, do we mirror some of your favorites, or what did we miss? We'd love to hear from you. James?
Absolutely. Why is our top 10 or our top 10s so wrong, so ridiculous, so unbelievably naive and blinkered and whatever? Anyway, just whatever comments you have, positive, negative, bring them on. It's arguably the greatest film conversation of all time. It's like, what are your favorite films? What are the best films? These are clearly our favorites, but that always bleeds into best. It's like objectively, which are the best? Well, you can't be objective if I am the one deciding. They have to be my favorites as well, and these are mine, and those are yours. And we only had one overlap, so that's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Perfect sort of intersection. So does that mean that Jaws is our favorite movie?
It's our favorites. Well, we can talk about that again.
Definitely.
Here's on to the next 200 videos, James. It's been a great
Cheers.
ride so far. Looking forward to 2025.
See you later.
You
Bye-bye.
ought to
All right.
be in
Take care. Bye-bye.
You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures. Oh, what a hit you would be. You're